right, we got great fellowship going. We'll start in about 4 minutes. 4 minutes. Check, check, check. Hello, Bobby. 1, 2. Good morning. Man, it's good to see everybody. Everybody's smiling. Got an extra hour of sleep. Good morning, Kel. Got an extra hour of sleep. I love it. It's funny. I got up early this morning. Always get up early on Sunday and make sure I read and have everything all together. And so when we were in New Mexico this week, and Beth's watch, I mean, she wears it religiously. It's a Fitbit, and it went out, and she didn't charge it when we were in the mountains. Well, this morning, of course, you know your phones, and if you've got your watches sunk, whatever, they change at the same time. Well, hers, she charged it yesterday, so when it actually sunk with her phone, it was still on mountain time. And so I'm up, getting ready, and she's looking like, I'm not getting up at 5:15. That's crazy. But it was 6:15, right? So there's always a little hiccup. Beth and I had the award for a long time here of being prompt, the most prompt couple here, because we messed up and didn't set our clocks, and we got here an hour before everybody else. Like, where is everybody? It was really kind of embarrassing, but it worked out okay. So anyway, it's good to see everybody this morning. We're going to continue our study of children's Bible stories, the adult version. And so I'm really having a lot of fun with this, and I hope you all are too. So just as a review David, Samson, Jonah. Yep, yep. So today we're going to dig into Gideon. I thought since we were already in Judges with Samson last week, that it would be fun to go ahead and look at another judge. And of course, this is a story that our kiddos get pretty early in their education of the Bible. And so I thought we'd just kind of stick in Judges. We're really going to look at Gideon. And I love Gideon. And we're going to see why. And I think you'll appreciate that more too. But we're also going to do a little bit of compare and contrast to Samson and the two different kinds of judges. We decided last week that Samson had a purpose, but what did we say about him and his overall demeanor? What did we kind of come to the conclusion of? Big ego, right? Yeah. He was a pretty selfish judge, and I really kind of got in a hurry at the end, and but I don't know if you caught it. He's the only judge where it doesn't say at the end, when the description is there, that it doesn't say that there was peace. We're going to find out today with Gideon, it says at the end that there was peace for 40 years when he was the judge. But Samson, that was not there. He's the only one that it wasn't there. So I found that really interesting. So we talked about him, and God had a purpose for him, had a purpose for his strength, and all the things that he did. It was in order to start the process of getting rid of who? Remember? Yes, exactly. Which we see in David. Samson had already started that some, but we kind of concluded that he was a pretty selfish guy. But what I didn't mention is when you go over to Hebrews 11, and the Hebrew writer is talking about people of faith for all chapter 11. Who's there? Samson's there. And I found that kind of interesting. Never had really thought about it. The Hebrew writer goes into real detail of people with faith, and then he says, I don't have time to talk about. And there's a whole list of men there of faith, and Samson's one of those. So I found that kind of fun. And I really thought about that some this week and thought, why would that be? I think he did have some faith because at the end, we talked about his prayer was pretty selfish. He wanted revenge. He wanted to get his strength back so that he could have revenge. But I think the faith part of it was that he still continued to call on God. Because what had happened? His eyes were gouged out. He had been embarrassed. He had to turn a grinding wheel. All of these things could have caused him just to totally turn against God, couldn't it? And sometimes when we get down and out in our own lives, we don't think about God that much. But Samson, even though it looked like his prayer was kind of selfish, he still turned to God. He still had faith that God, even if it meant that his life was going to end, he still was going to serve God's purpose. So I think that's where the faith part of Samson came from, that the Hebrew writer's talking about. Y'all agree with that? Have you ever thought about that before? And please give me your thoughts. I could be totally wrong. Jim, am I totally wrong? Yeah. It's just not, is it? Yes. Yeah. So, but I really thought about that. Why is he in that list of men of faith? And that's the conclusion that I came to. So when we're in heaven, maybe we'll get a chance to ask some questions, and that might be what I ask. What about Samson? So that was Samson. But in contrast, we're going to talk about Gideon today. So in the children's version, what do we focus on when we're teaching our kiddos about Gideon? What are the events? Because when we're teaching our kids, there's always a big event that we focus on. So what event do we talk about when we talk about Gideon? What's that? How they were selected? Yep, we sure do. What else? The fleece. The fleece wet and dry, right? So those are really the two things that we focus on. fascinating to me, man. And there's a lot of different reasons why. So that's what we're going to get in today. So yeah, I can't remember which teacher it was in elementary school, but they actually had a fleece, and we were able to touch it, and feel how soft it was, and she'd wet it, and then I think she actually had two, and had a dry one, so that tactile form of teaching where you can actually feel it, and I remember that, and I think that's important, even as adults sometimes. I think that we ought to look at ways to learn, using all of our senses. I think that's really important to us, and we don't do that very often. Oh, that's for the kids. Well, maybe it's not. Maybe it's not. Maybe we should do that as well. Look at this man walking in here just like almost normal. I love it. So, our text today comes from Judges chapter 6 through 8. And as we've been doing, we're just going to read a little bit, and as we go through, we're going to point some things out. So we've already talked about the things that we discussed the most about Gideon and what we teach with our children, but there's so much more to that. So I think it's interesting. So almost every chapter starts this way in Judges. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and for 7 years he gave them into the hands of the Midianites. So they all start that way, and we kind of realize who the enemy is from the very beginning. Because the power of Midian was so oppressive, the Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in mountain cliffs, caves, and strongholds. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern peoples invaded the country. They camped on the land and ruined the crops of all the way to Gaza and did not spare a living thing for Israel, neither sheep nor cattle nor donkeys. They came up with their livestock and their tents like swarms of locusts. It was impossible to count the men and their camels. They invaded the land to ravage it. Midian so impoverished the Israelites that they cried out to the Lord for help. So when did the Israelites cry out like they always did? When they're in trouble. We're in there. We can relate to that sometimes, can't we? We don't call out when we're in trouble, but man, they did it over and over and over again. They just continued this pattern. So once again, they thought they were doing things with their idols and marrying outside of their community like they're not supposed to do. When they're in the worst kind of trouble, what do? Now, that's when we call God. And what does God do? He is we don't think about it. I think that's a lot of reason that we even have the Old Testament, is to see that God loves us and God is merciful. Because he continues, even with the things that are bad with the Israelites, the whole point of the Old Testament, it's a love story that God has for us. And I think we read it differently a lot of times. We read about the battles, we read about the death, we read about the punishment. And that's what we think about. But it's not a standard operating procedure. It's not written in a negative way. The Old Testament's written in a positive way for us, so that we see the love of God. And I think that gets overshadowed a lot. Do y'all agree with that? Have you thought about that? And I think if we study with that mindset, that this is a love story from God to us so that we understand him better, then it changes your whole perspective of how you study. Go ahead, Jim. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It does. It does. Right. Yeah. He does. He does. He will. And so I wanted to bring that up and and spend a little bit of time there because I think it helps us to understand Gideon a little bit better. Because Gideon is a normal, ordinary guy. Samson, we know, had purpose. God had purpose for him before he was even born, right? We already knew how he was going to be raised. We knew about his parents. We had a lot of information about what his mission was. Gideon, a little different. He's just an ordinary guy. So we talked about what the circumstances were. I mean, they're hiding out in caves. I mean, they're just being overrun. And I think it's funny when you read these Old Testament stories, especially Judges, and you look at the region that's always in turmoil like it is today. We're talking about the same people. If you don't realize that, do a little history study or have Logan talk to you about it. We're talking about the same people, and they're doing the same things. Anyway, let's keep going. So, when the Israelites cried to the Lord because of Midian, he sent them a prophet who said, and this prophet is unnamed, we don't know what his name was. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says: I brought you up out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I snatched you from the power of Egypt and from the hand of all your oppressors. I drove them from before you and gave you their land. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you live, but you have not listened to me. So once again, the prophet reminds them that they have sinned, that they have turned their back against God once again. Then the angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abizite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior. So Gideon is just, he's trying to hide food. That's what he's doing. Just a simple guy that had a simple choice of, to help out, and that's what he chose to do, is try to hide some food so that they had some sustenance. And then the angel of the Lord, which we can do a whole study on, and maybe we'll do that at some point, but says to Gideon, the Lord is with you, you mighty warrior. He's like, what are you talking about? I'm just an average Joe here. But sir, Gideon replied, if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that your fathers told us about when they said, did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and put us into the hand of Midian. So Gideon is kind of like, oh, woe with us, right? Where have you been? Where have you been? Yeah. 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 He wasn't doing a... Go ahead. Yeah. Right. You do it inside. So he wasn't comfortable right now at all. Um, you can kind of see, we know about how they dressed. He probably had something over his face, He was dusty, he was dirty. If anybody's ever put hay up in a barn and it was kind of tight, the dust that's in there is incredible. You're just choking. This is worse than that. So this is kind of what he was. And so he's asking, where have you been? He said, but now the Lord has abandoned us and put us in the hand of Midian. The Lord turned to him and said, go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you? So the Lord is giving him a direct order. He's kind of like, The Lord turned him, but the Lord, Gideon asked, how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I'm the least in my family. So, just kind of reading the beginning of this, who does this kind of parallel remind you of? Moses, very much Moses, right? Kind of the same conversation that God had with Moses. The Lord answered, I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites together. Then Gideon said, if now I have found favor in your eyes, give me a sign that it's really you talking to me. Please do not go away until I come back and bring my offering and set it before you. So how to do this. And then he says, don't leave, but let me go, but give me a sign. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I think you're absolutely right about that. He's not being defiant, is he? He's not saying, no, I'm not doing this. No, he wants to know what he's getting into, right? I agree. I agree. Aren't we that way? We're kind of skeptical, aren't we? We are. But do we? I don't know. I don't think we do, maybe as much as we're able to do that. And I think we see that in Gideon. So he asked for a sign, and I don't think it was wrong. I've read a lot of different commentaries that said, who does Gideon think he is to question the Lord? I don't think he's questioning the Lord. I think he wants some acknowledgement. I think he wants to know that I'm going to jump all in, and if I do, God's got my back. I kind of think that's his thought process. Jim? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. A world of difference. And that's exactly what Ron was saying. Thomas did the same thing. What's that? That's right. They had already received signs. Yeah, that's right. So anyway, the angel of God said to him, take the meat and unleavened bread, because that's what he brought back to him. Put them on a rock and pour out the broth. Gideon did so with the tip of the staff that was in the hand. The angel of the Lord touched the meat and the unleavened bread. Fire flared from the rock, consuming the meat and the bread. We don't teach our kids that one too much. But I think that's pretty much what a great sign, right? And what was his response? When he realized it was the angel of the Lord, he exclaimed, "Oh, sovereign Lord, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." Now that scared him, because what happens to anyone that saw the Lord face to face? They died. He knew that, didn't he? He knew that. So he was afraid that was going to happen. Peace, do not be afraid, you're not going to die. So Gideon built an altar to the Lord there and called it, "The Lord is Peace." What a cool altar name. Same night, the Lord said to him, take the second bull from your father's herd, the one 7 years old, tear down your father's altar to Baal, and cut down the Asherah pole. Then build a proper, kind altar to the Lord your God on top of this height, using the wood of the Asherah pole that you cut down, offer the second bull. So Gideon does that. Now, he's still, I think, a critical thinker. I love that, Jesse. I love the way you put that. He knows he's going to be in trouble, maybe even from his own family. They're not going to like him at all. So he goes and does this at night. God didn't tell him how to do it, did he? He didn't say go at high noon and do this. He gave him the ability to think about it, but he went and did what he said, even knowing that he might lose his family over this. I mean, that's a big deal. Think about some of the things that maybe in your past, if you've had family that maybe doesn't believe like you do, what are you willing to do? What are you willing to do? Are you willing to give up your family for God? I mean, that's a choice that he's having to make early on here. So I don't know if you've ever thought about that, but he made the right one. And then what happens? The father says, hey, everybody determined who did this, and they're like all scared of Baal, and so they're wanting to go and kill Gideon. And Gideon's father pretty much just says, look, if Baal is a god, let him take care of himself. So this small feat, I think, turned Gideon's family around. Not just him, a pretty big thing, but just think about that. Being an example, you might have the ability to turn your entire family around if you just trust God. And that's one thing that we see in Gideon. So he just continues on. I think every time he does something really, really good, you're going to see that his confidence begins to build. So the next part that we talk about is the actual give me another sign. Now, is there anybody else in the Bible that asked for one more sign or did any kind of negotiation with God? Abraham. He did, didn't he? Started at, 100 people and got down to there's 5? I mean, I can't remember, it was just, so he negotiated that way. Gideon, he kind of does the same thing, give me a sign. And so as we know the story about the fleece, one time he wants the ground to be completely dry, but the fleece is to be wet. And so God grants that sign. And then he asks him, well, just one more. So he reverses the process. So was that wrong of Gideon? I don't think it was wrong of Gideon. He wanted to be, again, completely sure. Now, what if God said, you know what? If one sign's not enough for you, then just, I'll go find somebody else. But that's not what God did. And I think we missed this point, too. I think God continued to grant him this. One, his patience is way beyond what we can ever think of. But he granted him these signs to continue to encourage him. So I think a lot of times in Gideon, we focus on the questioning of God. Give me one more sign. Let's focus on what God can do for us when we trust him. Let's focus on God encouraging us. I think we forget that. God does things for us all the time that encourage us to continue to fight the good fight. And that's what he did for Gideon. He encouraged him to go on. And so he's gonna fight this battle. And he's got thousands of men to do it with. What does God do? Oops, you got too many men. I'm going to help you dwindle that down. And here's why. God doesn't just, out of blind faith, say, you only need 300 men. He could have. But he doesn't do that. He says, I'm going to help you make the decision about who fights and who doesn't. I think that's something that we really need to think about with Gideon, is that God is providing help and guidance to accomplish the task. He didn't just leave Gideon to his own devices, and Gideon listened. And so, at first, anybody that's afraid, go away. Like 22,000? Something? Yeah. 22,000 people say, what, I'm afraid. I'm not going to fight this battle. So that leaves him with 10,000. 10,000 is still a pretty big number. But God says, no, we're going to reduce that down. Now, we don't want the Israelites to be able to say, we did it, we conquered them with 22,000 people. I want them to realize, I'm here to help them. You trust in me, everything's going to work out. So now the other story that we tell our kids is what? In order to dwindle them down more, how does God help Gideon decide? How they drink. Yeah, how they drink. And so the ones that just went and lapped like dogs, nope, you're not part of this army. But the ones that were strategic and smart, that kept their eyes open and knelt down and grabbed the water so they could continue to see, those are the smart guys. Those are the 300 that God wanted. So what a cool thing. So God is in control. So now then, the battle is upon him. Gideon is still a little bit scared. He knows that God's with him. His confidence is building. And God says, one more thing. Before I send you in, one more thing I'm going to kind of allow you to do. And so, let's look at chapter 7, verses 9 through 23. during that night, the Lord said to Gideon, get up, go down against the camp, because I am going to give it into your hands. If you are afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant Purah and listen to what they are saying. Afterward, you will be encouraged to attack the camp. So he and Purah, his servant, went down to the outposts of the camp. The Midianites, the Amalekites, and all other eastern peoples had settled in the valley thick as locusts. The camels could no more be counted than the sand on the seashore. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. Gideon arrived just as a man was telling a friend his dream. I had a dream, he was saying. A round loaf of barley bread came tumbling into the Midianite camp. It struck the tent with such force that the tent overturned and collapsed. His friend responded, this can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands. When Gideon heard the dream and its interpretation, he worshiped God. He returned to camp of Israel and called out, get up! The Lord's given the Midianite camp into your hands. So, can you see the confidence that Gideon is portraying here? Now then. So God has given him all the tools. God has allowed him to have some signs. He's committed. So his growth just continues. Now he hears the dream. He is ready to go to battle. So look at the contrast from who am I, God, and where have you been, to now then, he is about to go and defeat this enemy because God has given him the tools to do it. That's the cool thing about Gideon, is that he was willing to listen to God. And the thing that we have to realize about God is he does not leave us alone. He gives us the tools to do what? Fulfill the mission. Now, the way Gideon goes about fulfilling the mission is a really great way too. This is a great battle. I did a class for our men, I don't know, a year or so ago, about different battles, and we talked about different strategies that was involved in the battles. This is really a neat one. So Gideon, he goes back to camp. The Lord's given the Midianite camp into our hands. So he's talking to the 300 men. Dividing the 300 men into 3 companies, he placed trumpets and empty jars in the hands of all of them with torches inside. Watch me, he told them. So now then, it's not just do what I tell you, but I'm going to be an example. Watch me. I'm going to teach you what you need to know for us to win. So we're looking at a completely different man now because of God, of course, but his confidence is up. I mean, he's that coach that says, look, I know we're down. I know we're in the 4th quarter, but guess what? We've been working hard. This is the 4th quarter. We're in better shape than the other team. We've got the right play. We're going to go and score. Now, if you've ever been in sports, whatever sport it is, you can remember that coach. It's called leadership. It's the guy that not only knows what to do, but he can convince others that this is the right thing. Gideon is now a leader. He's not just a called man. He's a leader now. I love to see the progression, the confidence that he has built. So look at me. I'm going to show you how to do this. Gideon and the 100 men went with him, reached the edge of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, just after they had changed the guard. They blew their trumpets and broke the jars that were in their hands. The 3 companies blew the trumpets and smashed the jars, grasping the torches in their left hands and holding their right hands the trumpet they were to blow. They shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." While each man held his position around the camp, all the Midianites ran, crying out as they fled. So this is a great battle. We see any death yet? They're scared. But they're scared because God strategically put these 300 men where they needed to be. It's nighttime. That's what the 3rd watch was they had already already gone to sleep. God puts, they're all camped out in a valley. God puts them in a high position. And they can see and hear, and it scares them to death. Of course, they get up, they start floundering around, and then God causes them to turn on one another, so they start killing each other. That's not the first time that God's done that. I think that's quite interesting. But the point is, Gideon has followed instructions exactly as God told him to do. The 300 men did the same thing. They followed his example. And here, God is causing them to kill themselves and to run away. Now, Gideon doesn't stop there. And others see what had happened in the next few days, and they continue to follow these people, and they're captured and completely out of their country. What a neat story, right? So, what kind of things can we learn from Gideon ourselves? What are some of the things that this story teaches us when we really dig into it? We don't just talk about fleece, and we don't just talk about lapping water like dogs. Those are important things when we're little to learn. But as adults, what can we really, really take away from Gideon? What do you think? What's that? Austin? What we can learn. Okay. He said Philippians 4:13. You got it memorized. You can say it. This is true. So Gideon, from questioning God, not really questioning God, but wanting some guidance from God. God provides the guidance. He grows, becomes a leader. And so this battle's over. So if we continue on in this text, they want him to be king now. They want him to be king. Now, at this point, put yourself in Gideon's place. You have risen from nothing, from choking in a wine press, all the way up to leading a battle and saving Israel. How is your ego? What do you think Samson would have done? I think Samson would have said, give me that throne. I deserve it. But that's not what Gideon does at all. What does he say? He says, I'm not going to be your king. He said, God is the only king we have. God is our king. So, even through all this, he was humble. Even though God helped him, he was humble and realized the power of God. And he was not about to be king. He did go ahead and step up to be a judge. And it ends by saying that there was peace under his judgment for 40 years. That's a long time. That's a whole generation of people. Go ahead. Because, right. Yes. It did not, did it? No. You're exactly right. It's huge. That's a great point. Yeah, that's right. So Samson, he took everything personal, didn't he? It was all about Samson. But with Gideon, it was all about doing what God said. With right. So we need to learn that lesson too. Well, he did blow the trumpet. He did show them what to do. He did show them to do that. And he did lead them confidently because he went in and said, get up. He knew that God had already delivered them before they ever even cracked one jar. He knew that. That's the point of Gideon, is that we have to learn that God does not leave us alone when we follow what he says. And it's okay for us to pray and ask. It's okay for us to pray and ask for things. Ask for God's guidance. Ask, give me a sign. Please help me find the direction I need to go. And I'm going to tell you this, your elders pray for that all the time. Please help us find the direction you want us to go, not the direction that Chuck, Bill, and Brian want to go. As a matter of fact, we ask all the time, if we're doing something wrong, shut that door and shut it quick, please. But we look at Gideon and think about the example and the leadership. And that's important. And God provides that for us. So that's my message this morning. I love Gideon. I love to look back at him as an example for my own life. And I think if you do that and study the way we're talking about studying these men, and we're going to talk about some women too. Don't worry about that. Because there's plenty of good examples of women that followed God's ways as well. Anyway, think about that this week. Pray about it. Pray for God's guidance. Pray that He gives you the example to go the direction that